All right, jumping in. I know Taylor's supposed to be here, but I got Matt and Mark and a bunch of other people, so feel free to have the conversation. We've got 838 listings, Fulton County active inventory. If you look across, that's the highest it's been, except for 1 week at the beginning of August. So how do we feel about that? I mean, I'd see that number as an opportunity. I see we were begging for that number a year ago, and now we've got it. So how do we go take advantage of that? That's 838 people in just Fulton County that have raised their hand and said, I'm willing to sell my house if you bring me a ready, willing, able buyer that can afford it, right? So there's opportunity in that number, of course. 150 active under contract. I call this the velocity number, meaning what is the pace at which the real estate community is taking houses off the market? And usually, if we look at the graph down here, that's this red line. Well, I've made mention that it seems eerily consistent. Like we sell the same number of houses every week, no matter what happens, which is just kind of ironic to me. However, I do see it starting to trend down a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. So if you go back and look at these numbers, we were 147, 145, 144, yearly consistent. Then it's slowly, since the end of August, started to come down just a little bit. Not a lot, 20 houses a week. But when you're looking at 150, that's, what's that, a little over 10% a week. So you can start to see that number coming off. And when you see it coming off 10%, we're going to feel 10% a little bit. It's not going to feel drastic, but you'll feel it. It's enough to feel. Pending is kind of the same story, right? Over here at the beginning of August, we were seeing 360, 350, 340, pretty healthy numbers. Of course, that's the end of the summer. And we slowly started the climb down, and 259 outside of this 238 in the middle of September seems to be off a little bit. Like I said, not crazy, but it's certainly, where'd my numbers go? 360 down to, we could probably average this out to about 290, 285. That's enough to take notice. That's almost 15, 20%, right? Which you definitely would feel in the pending category. And if we're looking in closings, you had 284 the first week of October, which included the end of the month closings. And you had 272 in the last 7 days. It's certainly, I don't know, it doesn't look like it's crazy off, right? So you've got windshield numbers and you got rear view mirror numbers. These would be the rear view mirror numbers saying where we've been, but the numbers where we're going, which would be the active under contract and the pendings, if I can do this here, they're showing a little off, right? 10 to 20%, depending on what we're looking at. So going forward, we're seeing a little slowdown. In the rear view mirror, maybe a hair here, but it's pretty hard to make a case that it's a drastic drop off yet. Does that make sense? Somebody else, what are you seeing in these numbers? I'm trying to give you my overall view.
Brett, Matt and I talked about last week about just seeing a return to seasonality that we hadn't seen over the year and a half of COVID. So I think this is part of that.
I agree 100%. Although historically, we usually do kind of see a little comeback in the month of October. Like there's usually a feeling of slowing down at the end of summer, and there's a little uptick in the month of October, which we're not necessarily seeing that uptick this October, if that makes sense from a seasonality perspective. If we jump over some of the other counties, DeKalb, 532, pretty close to the top end of the inventory. Active under contract, we've got slow, right here, you can see it. And then it slowly started to go down a little bit in terms of the velocity of us putting houses under contract. Pending sure looks pretty consistent to me. I mean, obviously it bounces around a little bit, and 168 and 174 are definitely lower than 210 and 212. But we saw some 160 numbers in the middle of September. If I go back even further, back in June, of course, the peak of the summer months, we were popping 200 plus, right, in the pending category. So it's certainly going to feel slower right now than June, which speaks what you're talking about, Mark, that seasonality. We expect that. The problem is our memories are short, and we didn't experience that the last 2 years because it was pedal to the metal. But closings in DeKalb County, this number gives me a little concerned. I actually think DeKalb County gets more disrupted than some of the other counties. That's a personal opinion. But their numbers seem a little more volatile than some of the other counties like Fulton and Cobb. If we jump over to Cobb, 553 active. A couple other weeks we had a little bit more, but it's still on the high end of the active inventory. 7, I'm guessing that's a clerical error. I'll go back and check on that. I don't think we had 7 go under contract in the last 7 days. We had 189 pending, which, same kind of deal. You might see 10%, 15% slowdown in the pending numbers. And then if you get down here to closings, 186, 271, big week, back down 201, 223, 182. I'm cool with 191 in Cobb County. Like that seems to be rear view mirror healthy. Forward facing mirror, I'll get you an update on this, but 189 in the pending category and 553, those show pretty healthy numbers. The other big county obviously is Gwinnett. We can just check it out real quick. 725. This what's my active option? There we go. 68. Definitely a slowdown from the summer, but nothing too drastic. 206 in the pending category. That's a big slowdown from the summertime for Gwinnett County. That's almost it's over 20% slowdown in Gwinnett. And you can see we're on a 2-week trend here. But the closings 222, 225. I'd make a pretty good case that Gwinnett's already slowed down. So what else am I missing? What do y'all see?
So may I ask a question about interpreting these numbers?
Yeah.
So, they different times of the months, they can kind of toggle up and down a little, right?
Yeah, of course.
Do you find it helpful to just, look at the same week each month to try to notice the trend? I get a little thrown off as they toggle up and down.
Yeah.
How do you like to, do you have a favorite week too that you feel is more consistent? I don't
necessarily have a favorite week, but I can tell you the numbers are pretty consistent with the exception of the end of the month. The end of the month, you're always going to see a spike at the end of the month. Or a spike if we're talking about closings. You'll see a dip if we're talking about active inventory, because that's when expireds happen. That's when people sell them, that kind of thing. But outside of that, the middle of the months are pretty consistent.
Okay. So that's the week right at the end, right at the beginning, that if it's helpful, just skip over those and look the next.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And, you gotta, we do these every Monday. So Stephen goes in, our cyberbacker goes in and pulls these numbers every Monday morning. So it's very consistent on when we pull it. But what's not consistent is the US holiday calendar. So they're not always, sometimes there's holidays at the end of the month. And when you're selling real estate, you shift your closing dates based on holidays. So you do have to kind of take these numbers and go cross check it with a holiday calendar, because Thanksgiving sometimes is the last week of November and sometimes it's the second to last week of November, and that'll drastically shift these numbers. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, I want to jump over to a couple other things. Let's start with something fun. So there's this company called Picasso, and Picasso is a second home market platform. And this is just something new to the industry that I was going to show you about. But what this is you buy an eighth of a second home market, right? So they have listings all over the place. But here's why I think this is interesting. One is, there's two reasons I find this interesting. If you go down to the story, this is all the leadership team that built Zillow in the beginning. And they've left Zillow, and this is their next project, okay? So Picasso is gonna take some time, but it'll become a big deal. But here's the thing that I think is interesting is if you click these listings, obviously these are high-end luxury listings, and like you can buy this an eighth of this house in Hilton Head for $734,000. There's a lot of questions that go to that. But the thing that I see as a trend is fractional ownership of luxury second home markets. So do we have second home markets in our backyard? Sure. I think there's condos downtown that are second homes. I think there are lake houses that are second homes. Do I think this is, like I said, this is no judgment. We bring all the trends to this call. I think there's going to be lake houses that people fractionally own. I think there's properties in Blue Ridge people fractionally own. I think that is a trend that is coming to stay as the price of real estate continues to climb. And it's just something to pay attention to. I'm not telling you to go out and buy an eighth of a house on 30A. I'm saying you may come across a penthouse listing in downtown Atlanta that someday might be a candidate for this, right? Where I could tell you, to me, I'd rather own 100% of $1 million property than an eighth of a $8 million property. But my wife and I are not on the same page in that conversation. So it depends on who you are and what's important to you, right? I was in Montana last weekend, and we looked up the house we stayed in. It was $7 million. And I can tell you a lot of people would buy an eighth of it to spend an eighth of the time there. And then now you're talking $800,000 for a second home that's really an $7 million house, right? So this is a trend. Just pay attention, that's all. All right, this guy, it's an opinion piece, but the question is, are we really in a housing recession? And the reason I wanted to bring this article to the table is not to sit here and argue, are we in a housing recession? He makes a great case. I don't think there's anything new in this article that we haven't talked about for weeks on end in these industry updates. But here's why I wanted to bring it up is this one sentence right here says, there seems to be a great deal of confusion between our current market conditions and those of the 2008 era housing crisis. And I want our agents to have the dialogue around this. And here's the difference in my words, and then I would like some other people to give me your words of how it's different. One is the 2008 was created because of bad lending practices. And there was a lot of people upside down or over leveraged on houses. Then the market flattened out and they lost jobs and had to sell at losses. First of all, we don't have a lot of houses that are upside down or over leveraged in any market right now. One. Two, unemployment is at historically low rates. So people have jobs if they want a job, and if they don't like their job, they usually can get another job right now. Like, it's not a problem. Employment is not a problem. What is a problem is the cost of money. So interest rates going up is going to slow down demand. Interest rates going up is actually going to slow down inflation, which is good for the economy. So what's happening is the government is intentionally slowing our industry down to get a grip on the growth of the overall economy so we can be stable in the years to come. And that's very different than what happened in 2008, 9, and 10. What happened in 2008, 9, and 10, where a lot of lives and a lot of financial positions were ruined by US homeowners because, quite honestly, realtors pushed them into houses they probably maybe shouldn't have bought. Lenders were a little predatory in how they got them into those houses. We all had some responsibility in that crisis, but this crisis is really no responsibility of any bad practice. It's just the economy got out of line that needs to come back into line. Does that make sense? And I think it's important for us all to be able to explain that, because every news media article you read, I pulled up, here's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I was just reading the headlines, and it's always negative, right? Of course, this one's all about the airport, but I was looking there. I looked at Fox 5 News. Still time to save. Today's 30-year mortgage rates hold steady. That was on Friday. They had the interest rates on Friday, 6.75 unchanged on a 30-year. I don't know anybody that does 20-year, but if you did, they're over 7. 15-year at 6% flat, and 10 years 6% flat. These were on Friday. So I think it's important you have the ability to I lost my article. Explain the difference. Does that make sense? What would y'all add? Matt, Mark, Taylor on yet? I don't know.
Could you clarify how the government is slowing it down? I can't remember if you gave us a specific example, but what were your meaning there, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, no problem. What's happening is inflation just means that the economy expanding too fast, and the government doesn't want that to happen, because at some point in time, inflation means the value of the dollar is at risk. So think of third world countries when they lose control of their monetary system. Like, I think it happened in Venezuela, right? Like, they couldn't control their money. Well, the US government has dials that they can use to try to keep control of the value of the US dollar. Well, inflation means the value of the US dollar is getting out of control. They want to bring it down to control the value of the US dollar. And one of the ways they do that is they raise the cost of money, meaning if you want to borrow money, the prime interest rate, they crank it at 0.5 point, 1/4 point, 3/4 point, and they're going to keep cranking that prime interest rate until inflation comes down to where they feel the value of the US dollar is stable. Does that make sense?
I get that. I thought that there was something more than just jacking the Fed rate, but that's pretty much.
Well, the Fed only has 2 levers. One, the cost of money, and monetary policy, right? So they they seem to believe that the cost of money, which is the interest rates, is the right lever to pull the inflation down. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
May I ask yet another question?
You may.
So is anyone else experiencing clients on both ends, selling and buying, who feel like they want to sit on the fence because of concerns about what might happen and wait and see what happens in our Atlanta market? And if so, does anyone have any news articles or things about our market? Because aren't we an anomaly to this nationwide slowdown in general? And what do we have to boost our confidence for our clients in our market?
Yeah, so you got to start with one question. And the first question you got to start with is, how long do you plan on owning your next house? Because historically, if somebody's going to own real estate for longer than 5 years or 7 years, they will always win in any market. But if they plan on owning their next house for 2 years, there could be a chance that they would break even or maybe even potentially lose, because we understand the cost of buying and the cost of selling is included in that conversation, right? So
Right.
If I buy a house for $500,000 today and I sell it for $500,000 2 years from now, the cost of buying it today and the cost of selling it 2 years from now actually puts me behind. Does that make sense? So you need that price appreciation to happen over a period of time. So do we feel 100% confident that you're going to have crazy price appreciation in the next 2 years? I wouldn't give you a whole lot of assurance on that, but I would tell you, I would give you an enormous amount of assurance that over the next 5 to 7 years, I can show it to you historically on a graph. Does that make sense? So you got to start with that question first.
Yes. And what would you show them, Brett? Would you show them a graph that shows the price appreciation over the past 10 years or 20 years, or what would you do to back up that conversation?
Yeah, I would show the 50-year price appreciation graph that Gary Keller always shows. And I'm trying to see if I can find one real quick to show you. Give me a second. Mark, how would you answer that question?
I'm pulling up the graphic, Mark, if you want to handle that.
Thank you. I think we're all doing the same thing.
All right, I'm on
your email, Matt.
By the way, there was, I should probably go back and find this. I did see in Atlanta Agent Magazine a couple of weeks ago, there was an article which said Atlanta is one of the top 5 investment destinations for people investing
Right.
in real estate.
Could be, for sure.
So that
I
would
think
seem
Brett's
to
right, though.
indicate.
It all goes back to someone's motivation, right? So it's our job to help people make good decisions, not necessarily to convince them to buy or not to buy, or to sell or not to sell. So it's really digging deep on motivation and helping people see the long-term ramifications of their purchase, and that, if they are planning on staying a while, then the rates are not really consequential.
Okay, thank you. So really take a look at the long term, not the short term.
Yep.
It has to be.
Oh no, are the prices going to fall? Is the sky falling? So we just go back to the long term and say, we don't have a crystal ball. However,
And what I say is, in the worst economic downturn in our lifetime, which was the Great Recession, it took 9 years for prices to come back up and beyond where they were. And that's what that graph shows. So if if in the worst downturn we've experienced, it took 9 years, then, it's going to take less in any lesser downturn. So
on this chart Matt's got up,
Okay.
you can see that in the worst of the worst, let's say I bought in 2008, it probably took till 2014 for my value of my property to reach an equal or greater price, right? So how many years is that? That is 6 years. So that's the worst of the worst it's ever been.
Is that Atlanta or nationwide?
This is national. We have it in Atlanta. I just can't find it fast enough to get it on this call.
Okay.
But in the worst of the worst, I could show you it's probably 6 years.
So that's the go-to to show them.
Yeah, but we're not going to experience prices going backwards like that. It's a different recession. We're going to feel prices slowly flatten out, but we're not going to see them go negative. And if we do, it's going to be certain little pockets. And I just don't think it's worthy of waiting to buy. I think anybody understands. It's just like, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, 20 years ago is the right answer, but since I can't do that today, right? Well, if you think of equity in properties, it's the same thing. What's the best way to build wealth or equity in real estate? Well, it was to buy the house 20 years ago, but you can't do that. So you got to buy the house today and sit on it for 20 years. And that's where the value of that equity comes in. And even if the market goes a little slow, you will win long-term 100% of the time. But the nervous nillies, or whatever you want to call it, the ones that are going to get nervous, they're going to pay the value of that real estate. They're going to pay 2 years from now price. And I can tell you, they're not going to pay less. They may pay flat, but they will more than likely pay more.
What do you mean? Right.
If I don't buy a $500,000 house today and I say, oh, I'm going to wait for 2 years and I'm going to buy that same house 2 years from now, I'm not going to pay less than $500,000 2 years from now. I might pay $500,000, but more than likely I'm going to pay 600.
Well, here's the thing, like you said, with the exception of, certain little pockets, overall, our supply is still historically low and the fundamentals of our demand are increasing.
What do you mean the fundamentals of our
the
demand?
demand is increasing. We have more businesses and more people continuing to move here.
I'm not sure I agree 100% with that statement right now.
Okay.
And that's what we were talking about on the stats. I do believe demand is slowly starting to slow down. Even though jobs and people are up, I think you're seeing where supply was so tight and demand was so high, we had this acute market. Well, supply is going up and demand is tapering off, which is going to create more space between supply and demand.
More of a chill. So even though we don't have a 6-month supply,
correct,
it's still
correct.
might feel that way.
Yeah, Terry, let's take that conversation offline because I want to get this out there before I run out of time.
I have a quick question. I just have a quick question. In your stats, do you have a line item that shows, and again, this is just because we're getting the questions from buyers, on what the trend is on price adjustments?
We have those in the chart master stats.
Okay.
So do you have access to the chart master?
I do.
Okay.
I just wasn't sure where to look, but I'll take a look.
They literally just posted those. Let me see if I can find it.
So yeah, price reductions up 19% year over year. I saw that stat because it was just sent out. And then let's see. Yeah, so 40% of all closed sales had a price reduction last quarter.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Here you go. This is the slide right here. We've got current market September 22, 40.3% of price reductions. The normal market 2019 had 44.8. And then normal market September 2016 had 40.4. So what that means is we're actually pretty normal, but it doesn't feel normal because there were no price reductions for 2 years.
Feels dramatic.
It feels like the world's falling apart, but the truth is, if you look historically, it's pretty freaking normal, right? And by the way, price and condition are what sell houses. So great listing agents know how to put price appropriately and get properties positioned and ready to go. And they're probably not the properties having to reduce their price right now. Make sense?
Yes, thank you. That was excellent. Appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to show you one last article. I'm getting there.
Sorry.
Open Door, OfferPad, Redfin. Their shares hit all-time lows on Wall Street. Here's the thing about these companies. Where does the money come from that they buy the houses with?
Hedge funds?
Wall Street, right? So if their cash is low because the value of the company is low, expect to see a slowdown of Open Door, OfferPad, and Redfin buying properties for cash. That's a good thing for us. That gives us more at bats if you want to play the Atlanta Braves game. It gives you more opportunity if you want to be a listing agent and get out there. Because I can tell you, Matt, what was the percentage Open Door took in Cobb County in a 12-month period? Like 20%?
It was like 22.5%.
Overnight.
Yeah.
So this is a powerful article that works in our favor. If they're not cash rich, it comes back to us. Make sense?
Yay.
Yay. All right. Sorry I ran over. Have a good one.